I never imagined my life would take such a drastic turn that summer in Chicago. At 40, I thought I had everything under control. A stable 15-year marriage to Mark, a successful career as an editor at a prestigious publishing house, and a beautiful home in the suburbs. But everything changed when I received that call from my best friend, Jessica. "Emily, I need to ask you a huge favour," Jessica said, with a tone of concern in her voice. "It's about my son, Jason. He's just been accepted to the University of Chicago to study architecture, but I don't know anyone there who can help him get settled. Do you think you could—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Jessica and I had been friends since college, and although life had taken us on different paths, she moved to California while I stayed in the Midwest, our friendship remained unbreakable. "Of course," I replied without hesitation. "I'd be happy to help Jason. He can stay with us as long as he needs until he finds his own place." I vaguely remembered Jason from the few times we had met at family gatherings. The last time I saw him, he was about 16, a gangly and shy teenager. Now, 7 years later, I was preparing to welcome a young adult into my home. On the day of his arrival, Mark and I went to pick him up at the airport. While waiting at the terminal, my mind wandered about what Jason would be like now. Would he still be that shy boy? Or would he have become a confident young man? The answer came when I saw him walk through the arrival gates. My heart skipped a beat. Jason had transformed into a tall, athletic man with a dazzling smile and green eyes that seemed to pierce your soul. His brown hair, slightly tousled, gave him a carefree air that contrasted with his carefully chosen clothes. For a moment, I was breathless. "Aunt Emily!" Jason exclaimed when he saw us, using that affectionate name he had always used for me despite not being related. He hugged me tightly, and I could feel the firmness of his body against mine. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickly pulled away, bewildered by my own reaction. Mark, oblivious to my confusion, welcomed him enthusiastically. During the drive home, Jason told us about his study plans and his excitement about starting this new chapter in Chicago. I tried to focus on the conversation, but I couldn't help stealing glances at the rearview mirror, meeting those green eyes that watched me with a disturbing intensity. The first few days passed without incident. I dedicated myself to showing Jason around the city, helping him familiarize himself with the campus and surroundings. Mark, busy with his work as a lawyer, barely spent time at home, which left Jason and me alone most of the day. It was during one of those city tours when things began to change. We were walking through Millennium Park when Jason suddenly stopped and looked at me intently. "Emily, I want to thank you for everything you're doing for me," he said in a soft voice that made my skin tingle. "I don't know how I could have adapted so quickly without your help." "You don't have to thank me, Jason," I replied, trying to maintain a casual tone. "It's my pleasure to help you." He took a step towards me, shortening the distance between us. "No, really. You're amazing. I've always admired you, you know, since I was a kid." His words took me by surprise. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, and for a moment, I lost myself in his eyes. It was then that I realized how dangerous this was becoming. I took a step back, breaking the spell. "We should head back," I said hastily. "It's getting late, and Mark will be coming home soon." The walk back was charged with a silent tension. I could feel Jason's gaze on me, and every time our arms accidentally brushed, an electric current ran through my body. "This is wrong," I repeated to myself over and over. "He's your best friend's son. He's young enough to be your son. You're married, for God's sake." But despite my efforts to maintain composure, something had changed. The following days became a sweet torture. Every moment alone with Jason was an internal battle between desire and reason. I caught myself dressing up more than usual, carefully choosing my clothes each morning, as if I were a teenager preparing for a date. One afternoon, while showing Jason how to use the washing machine in the basement, the inevitable happened. We were alone in the house. Mark had left town on business. As we bent down to load the clothes, our hands brushed. We stood still. The electricity in the air was palpable. Slowly, Jason turned to me, his eyes burning with a desire that mirrored my own. "Emily," he whispered, and before I could react, his lips were on mine. The kiss was intense, passionate, releasing all the tension accumulated over weeks. My hands tangled in his hair as he pressed me against the washing machine. For a moment, I allowed myself to get lost in that sensation, in the taste of his lips, in the heat of his young and vigorous body against mine. But then, like lightning, reality hit me. I pulled away abruptly, panting, "No, Jason, this is wrong. We can't," I said, my voice trembling. "Why not?" he asked, his eyes full of confusion and desire. "I know you feel it too, Emily." "You can't deny it." "I'm a married woman, Jason, and you're my best friend's son." "This can't happen," I replied, although every fibre of my being screamed otherwise. I hurried out of the basement, leaving Jason alone and confused. I locked myself in my room, my heart racing. What had I done? How had I allowed things to go so far? That night, as I lay in bed next to Mark, who had returned late from his trip, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the kiss with Jason, the feeling of his lips, the warmth of his body. I felt guilty, scared, but also alive. More alive than I had felt in years. The following days were an uncomfortable dance of furtive glances and tense conversations. Jason and I tried to act normally in front of Mark, but the atmosphere in the house had become electric. Every accidental brush, every moment alone, was charged with barely contained sexual tension. One afternoon, while Mark was at work, Jason found me in the kitchen. He approached me with determination. "Emily, we can't go on like this," he said in a low voice. "I know you're married. I know this is complicated. But what I feel for you is real. I can't just ignore it." I sighed, leaning on the counter. "Jason, I feel something too. But this can't be. There's too much at stake." He moved closer until I could feel the heat of his body. What if we found a way? What if we could be together without anyone getting hurt? His words were tempting, dangerously tempting. Part of me wanted to give in, wanted to throw myself into his arms and forget about everything else. But the rational part of my mind kept fighting. "I don't know how we could do that, Jason," I replied sadly. "Let me show you," he whispered, and before I could protest, his lips were on mine again. This time, I didn't have the strength to resist. I surrendered to the kiss, allowing my hands to explore his young, firm body. We kissed with unbridled passion, as if the world was about to end at any moment. When we finally separated, panting, I knew I had crossed a point of no return. I could no longer deny what I felt for Jason, nor what he felt for me. But I also couldn't ignore the complications this would bring to our lives. "We have to be careful," I finally said. "If we're going to do this, no one can know." "No one." Jason nodded solemnly. "I understand. It'll be our secret." And so began our clandestine affair. Over the next few weeks, Jason and I managed to find moments alone, stealing kisses and caresses when Mark wasn't home. Each encounter was a mix of unbridled passion and suffocating guilt. I felt like a teenager again, experiencing the thrill of a forbidden love. The adrenaline of almost being caught, the complicit glances during family dinners, the coded text messages. All of it added an excitement to my life that I hadn't felt in years. But as time passed, the guilt began to weigh more heavily. Every time Mark kissed me or told me he loved me, I felt as if I was being stabbed in the heart. And thinking about Jessica, about how she would react if she ever discovered what was happening between her son and me, filled me with paralyzing terror. One night, While Jason and I were in the guest room, taking advantage of Mark being out with colleagues, we heard the sound of the front door opening. Panic invaded us. Jason quickly hid in the closet while I tried to fix my clothes and hair. "Emily, are you upstairs?" Mark's voice echoed from below. "Yes, honey. I'm changing the sheets in the guest room," I replied, praying that my voice sounded normal. Mark came up the stairs and entered the room. He looked at me curiously. "Are you okay? You seem flustered." "I'm fine," I replied quickly. "Just a bit tired. I wasn't expecting you back so soon." He came closer and kissed me softly. I could smell the slight scent of alcohol on his breath. The meeting ended earlier than expected. "Where's Jason?" My heart raced. He went out with some friends he met at the university." Mark nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. "Well, since we're alone," he said with a suggestive smile, moving closer to me. I felt a wave of panic. Jason was hidden in the closet, just a few feet away. I couldn't let this happen here now. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry," I said, faking a yawn. "I'm really exhausted. How about we go to sleep?" Mark looked disappointed but nodded understandingly. "Sure, it's been a long day for everyone." We left the room and headed to our bedroom. As I lay down next to my husband, my mind couldn't stop thinking about Jason, trapped in that closet, waiting for the safe moment to come out. That night marked a turning point. The reality of what we were doing, the constant danger of being discovered, began to outweigh the excitement of our affair. I realized we couldn't go on like this indefinitely. Something had to change. The following days were torture. Every time I looked at Mark, I felt consumed by guilt. Every moment alone with Jason was tinged with a tension that went beyond desire. I knew we had to make a decision, but the fear of the consequences paralyzed me. It was Jason who finally broke the silence. One afternoon, while we were alone in the house, he confronted me. "Emily, we can't go on like this," he said, with a seriousness that surprised me. "This is destroying both of us." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "I know, Jason, but what can we do? I don't see a way out that doesn't end up hurting someone." He took my hands in his, looking me directly in the eyes. Maybe it's time to be honest. With Mark, with my mother, with everyone." The idea terrified me. "Are you crazy? Do you have any idea what that would do? It would destroy my marriage, your relationship with your mother, my friendship with Jessica." "I know," Jason said softly. "But don't you think we're already destroying all that with our lies? At least if we're honest, we'll have the chance to face the consequences with dignity." His words hit me hard. He was right, of course. Every day we maintained this charade. Every lie we told eroded the foundations of our relationships a little more. "I don't know, Jason," I replied honestly. "But I know we can't continue as we have been. We need to be honest with everyone, including your mother." Jason nodded, his face pale but determined. "You're right. I owe that to my mum, and you owe it to Jessica." The idea of facing Jessica filled me with terror. How would I explain to her that I had fallen in love with her son? That I had betrayed not only her trust, but also years of friendship? The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and confrontations. Mark returned briefly to pick up more of his things, his face a mask of pain and resignation. We didn't talk much. The chasm between us seemed unbridgeable. Jason and I decided that it was best for him to move to a dorm on campus. The tension in the house was unbearable, and we both knew we needed space to think, to decide what we really wanted. Finally, the moment I feared most arrived, facing Jessica. I decided that it was best to do it in person. I took a flight to California, my heart pounding throughout the journey. Jessica greeted me with a smile, which quickly faded when she saw my expression. We sat in her living room, cups of tea cooling in front of us. "Jessica," I began, my voice breaking, "there's something I need to tell you. Something that's going to hurt you deeply, and I'm so sorry." I saw the concern grow in her eyes as I told her everything. About Jason, about our affair, about how I had destroyed my marriage and betrayed her trust. The words came out in an unstoppable torrent, mixed with tears and apologies. When I finished, the silence that followed was deafening. Jessica looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if she couldn't recognize the woman sitting in front of her. "How could you, Emily?" she finally asked, her voice laden with pain and betrayal. "You're my best friend. I trusted you to take care of my son, not to seduce him." "I know, Jessica, and I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. You what?" she interrupted, anger replacing the initial shock. "It just happened. You tripped and fell into bed with my son." Her words hit me like slaps. I knew I deserved her anger, her contempt, but that didn't make it any less painful. "I have no excuses, Jessica," I said softly. "I can only tell you that I'm sorry, and that I'll understand if you can't forgive me." Jessica stood up, turning her back on me. "I need you to leave, Emily. I can't look at you right now." I stood up, feeling as if every movement cost me a monumental effort. Before leaving, I stopped at the door. "I love you, Jessica. You've always been my best friend. I'm so sorry for ruining that." I didn't wait for an answer. I left her house, tears blurring my vision as I walked to my rental car. The flight back to Chicago was a haze of self-reflection and regret. I had lost so much: my marriage, my best friend, the trust of the people who mattered most to me. And for what? An affair with a man much younger than me? When I arrived home, I was surprised to find Jason waiting for me. He was supposed to be in the university dorms, but there he was, sitting on the porch steps. "Jason, what are you doing here?" I asked, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety at seeing him. He stood up, approaching me with a serious expression on his face. "Emily, we need to talk. I've been thinking a lot these days, and I think we've made a huge mistake." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean?" Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Us. It's not real, is it? I mean, I feel something for you, of course I do, but is it enough to justify all the damage we've caused?" His words resonated within me, giving voice to the doubts I had been having myself. Was this love? Or just a fantasy, an escape from the monotony of my life? "I don't know, Jason," I answered honestly. "I thought it was, but now I'm not sure of anything." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our actions and their consequences weighing on us. "I think I need to leave," Jason finally said. "Not just this house, but Chicago. Maybe it's better if I take a gap year, travel a bit, clear my mind." I felt a pang of pain at the idea of him leaving, but I knew he was right. We needed space, time to think, to heal. "I understand," I said softly. "I think it's best for everyone." Jason nodded, and for a moment I saw the insecure young man who had arrived at my door just a few weeks ago. "I'm sorry, Emily, for everything. I'm sorry too, Jason," I replied, feeling tears forming in my eyes again. We hugged briefly, an embrace laden with regret and farewell. Then I watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the darkness of the night. I stood there, on the porch of a house that no longer felt like home, contemplating the ruins of the life I had built. I had lost so much, and now I was alone to face the consequences of my actions. The following months were a period of introspection and rebuilding. Mark and I divorced, a painful but necessary process. Jessica eventually agreed to speak to me again, although our relationship never returned to what it once was. Jason, true to his word, went travelling, occasionally sending postcards from far-off places. Little by little, I began to rebuild my life. I immersed myself in my work, seeking redemption in the pages of the books I edited. I started therapy, facing the demons that had led me to make such destructive decisions. A year after that fateful summer, I received a letter from Jason. He was in Europe, he wrote, studying architecture and discovering himself. He thanked me for what we had lived through, but also confirmed what we had both suspected. What we had wasn't love, but a fantasy, an escape. Reading his words, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I could finally close that chapter of my life, and sadness for everything I had lost in the process. But I also felt hope. Hope because, despite my mistakes, I had survived. I had learned. I had grown. And now I had the opportunity to build a new life, one based on honesty and integrity. As I looked out the window of my new apartment, watching the sun set over the Chicago skyline, I realized that this was my second chance. A chance to be better, to love better, to live better. And this time, I wouldn't waste it.